Welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host, Edward Russell, and this week I'm joined by special guest Mark Galardo, Air Canada's Executive Vice President of Revenue Network Planning, to talk about the airline's summer outlook, transatlantic and Asia recovery, and what's happening in the Canadian domestic market. Please enjoy. Hello, everybody. This week we have a fun guest on the podcast. We have Mark Galardo from Air Canada. He is the Executive Vice President of Revenue and Network Planning, including cargo, alliances, regulatory affairs, and sales. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Ed. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, we are recording here June 12th, shortly after the ATA AGM. How was the meeting for you guys?
It was action-packed. I don't think we had a spare minute when we were in Istanbul. We met with a variety of our partners, future partners, and it was nice to see the buzz in the room. A lot of optimism about the market, about the future. Yet, the usual concerns about supply chain, operational stability, of airlines around the world. I mean, I heard from airlines in Africa and Sri Lanka basically complaining about the same thing that we're complaining about here in Canada. So very interesting to see that, the industry opportunities and challenges are very much global.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the takeaway I took. I mean, everyone's talking about sort of a torrid pace of demand. People are eager to travel, but the supply chain, inflation, I mean, all the same pressures are pretty much hitting airlines everywhere, and it's holding the industry back a little bit. But everyone seems to be making do as they can.
Absolutely.
So, what about there for Air Canada? How does summer look for you guys?
Yeah, no, it's really exciting to see this summer how it's shaping up. We're going to be roughly 90% of where we were in 2019. So we're still lagging our American peers. A variety of reasons for that. We made some decisions during COVID about fleet and how long the recovery would take. And I think the pace of the recovery has surprised, us all to a certain extent. So we're definitely short on fleet, hence why we're at, 90% of 2019. But as well, we had a big operation in China and Hong Kong, and those have struggled to come back, which is contributing to the reason why we're not, at 100% of 2019. So that being said, we're seeing very strong demand, basically across the board. I think the pent-up demand is continuing all the way through summer. We're very much excited by what we see in the international market, what we see in our transborder market. And in particular, despite a very competitive domestic dynamic here in Canada, we're holding our own. So very, very exciting to see this summer develop. And, I think it could be, one of our better ones for sure.
Nice. Well, I mean, that definitely echoes some other executives, particularly south of the border for you guys that are saying this might be the best summer they've ever seen. One question, I've heard from a few people describe Canada as sort of a year behind the U.S. in the recovery. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Canada had very severe travel restrictions. In some cases, in the depths of the pandemic, we had travel restrictions within the country. So there's no doubt that, we saw what was going on in the US while we were, basically in the equivalent of an artificial coma here in Canada in terms of the airline industry. So we knew what to expect, but we knew we'd be, anywhere from 9 to 18 months behind our American peers, because obviously in the US, you had the strength of the domestic market and the travel restrictions were most definitely less severe than what we had in Canada.
Right. I mean, I just always remember there were restrictions on traveling to states, but it wasn't really enforced. I remember going to Connecticut early on in the pandemic, and it was just sort of a table that you could voluntarily walk up to declare where you were from, but it wasn't really anyone stopping you. It was here in the U.S. the restrictions domestically at least were not very heavily enforced, I think is the way to put it. Where I understand
Yeah,
Canada was much more severe.
Exactly. We had some provinces in Canada that, upon entry, you're forced into a mandatory isolation period, and that's traveling from within province to province. So we had to contend with that on top of, border restrictions. So glad to see that this is all behind us and we're focused now on, what's to come.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So one of the big markets this summer that everyone's talking about is the transatlantic. Is it looking as strong for you? I mean, you said everything's strong, but does transatlantic look exceptionally good this year compared to previous pre-pandemic years?
Well, just transatlantic has always been Air Canada's bread and butter. For as long as I've been at Air Canada, almost 20 years now, the transatlantic has always been a big strength of Air Canada's going forward, and we always knew that this was under utilized geography for us. Obviously, the transatlantic this summer looks extremely robust. But although it looks a lot stronger than it did, pre-pandemic, it's still, pre-pandemic the Atlantic was very important for us. So I have to say, like, it's just
Right.
continuing the trend that we had seen pre-pandemic. But the transatlantic next summer, this summer I should say, is really strong. And in particular, what we're noticing is a very strong desire from Canadians and Americans wanting to go to Europe, in particular, markets here that we call Club Med, Mediterranean
Okay.
markets, like
Yep.
Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal. There I have to say that's a level of demand that I have not seen ever. And we're flying a large 777 to those destinations. In many cases, there's simply not enough capacity. So
Wow. I mean, that's
yeah,
striking.
yeah, yeah,
Can
absolutely. I mean, we
I?
fly.
No, I was going to say, anywhere stand out? Is everyone going to Barcelona or Rome or anything? Any place that's just crazy busy out of those ones you highlighted?
Just Athens, Rome, Barcelona, Venice, Lisbon, all those destinations are red hot. Even Nice in the south of France.
Oh wow.
I was going to say, we fly the equivalent of what two 777 high density aircraft into Athens per day. Each of those aircraft have 450 seats on board. So the equivalent of our A380, if you will. And
Wow.
that again, it's not enough.
Wow. To imagine two daily 777s going into Athens, and that's not enough. That's a lot of people wanting to fly.
Yeah, indeed.
And how about Asia? You mentioned, of course, China is still restricted despite reopening. How was that recovery looking there? Because that was a big market for Air Canada pre-pandemic. Or Asia, not just China, that is.
Yeah, so we're back to 100% of where we were in 2019 in Japan, and we're basically back to 100% where we were on Korea, and of course, same for Australia. What we're noticing on Japan in particular, there's a couple of things kind of giving us a bit of a tailwind on Japan. So first point is, Japan again having very severe travel restrictions. There's a lot of pent up demand from point of sale North America to Japan. So
Right.
we've seen that, and that's been a big boon to that. But as well, because of Russia overflight concerns and restrictions, we're using Narita as a hub to Asia Pacific, and with our commercial partner, Al Nippon ANA, we're pivoting Narita as the way to get to a variety of destinations in Asia Pacific. So
It
that's
sounds like a
really
bit
contributing.
of a throwback to the good old days when everyone had to fly through
Indeed.
either Tokyo or Seoul to get to Asia.
Indeed, and we hope this will give ANA kind of a different perspective on the validity of Narita, and hopefully keeping Narita robust long term despite Haneda opening up. But obviously, we because of that Narita factor, Japan is quite strong. There's always been large demand between Canada and Korea, so that's rebounded quite nicely. And of course, what everybody else is saying about the Australasia market, Australia has been phenomenal. Generally speaking, the Pacific has been pretty good.
Okay.
On China, however, we're only flying 4 weekly,
That's the
and that's
same
where we're at.
restrictions
And
as the U.S. carriers have. I mean, we're there at 4 weekly per United American Delta, so it's 12, but it sounds like that's very similar.
yeah, it's kind of proportional to the size of the Canadian market, if you will. But yeah, that's where we're at. We're at 4 weekly, and that's where we think we'll be for the next little bit, and we'll take full advantage of that.
Okay. Does that impact your partnership with Air China, or is that sort of outside the?
It's
Yeah.
very much outside, and Air China continues to be a JV partner of ours.
Okay. Speaking of partners, I wanted to ask you. You launched last year a new partnership with Emirates, which of course, global super connecting giant. How is that going?
It's going very well. So just to give you a bit of background, here in Canada, I was listening to one of your podcasts where you talk about the Canadian market, the demographics, et cetera. But one of the things that's, maybe unique to Canada is that Canada is going to be taking a significant wave of immigration. The government has aspirations to take nearly 500,000 new immigrants per year from a variety of countries. So if you compound that over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, it's a major, international opportunity. And much of that demand is going to be coming from the Indian subcontinent. There's a very large immigration from, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, etc.
Okay.
So, when we looked at our partnership with Lufthansa, because we've got a long-standing JV with, our main partner, Lufthansa, this was an area of the world that Lufthansa didn't cover very well. And their ambitions for that part of the world are somewhat moderate. So therefore, we said to ourselves, we need something stable in that region for the long term. And we did an assessment, and we realized that Emirates would be the best partner to give us access to that part of the world. So we're in the
Okay.
very early innings here with Emirates, and we're more than impressed with what we see. We're going to be launching a Dubai Vancouver flight. I think Emirates is going to be launching a Dubai to Montreal flight, and our Dubai Toronto is now going daily year round. And with
Nice.
this partnership, we're going to have a bunch of benefits, from code share to customer experience to loyalty to moving into the same terminal in Dubai. I see a lot of long term value in this partnership with Emirates.
Could we see a joint venture there initially and eventually, or is it code share for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, JV is not on the map, and for a variety of reasons. One being that we're in the transatlantic JV with Lufthansa and United called A plus plus,
Yes.
and that part of the world is scoped into that JV, so it would be next to impossible right now to have a fully fledged JV with Emirates.
Got it. Fair enough. Fair enough. Mark, we're going to take a quick break, and I want to talk a bit more about the Canadian market, the domestic market there. So we'll be right back. And we're back. Listeners, if you're just tuning in, we're talking to Mark Galardo, Air Canada's Executive Vice President of Revenue Network Planning. And Mark, you were just talking about the domestic Canadian market and some of the dynamics there. The government has a target of 500,000 immigrants annually. I mean, what does the domestic market look like for Canada?
Well, the domestic market for us, for the longest time, there's been, this healthy competition between Air Canada and WestJet. And there's been a few, smaller domestic players, namely Porter, that was largely a Q400 operation based in Toronto Island. There's been a bunch of very small regional players that do regional flying. But in terms of heavy, transcon enabled airlines, it was really Air Canada and WestJet.
Right.
And what we're observing right now is the creation of multiple, ULCCs in Flair and in Lynx. And we're seeing the emergence or shifting of Porter's strategy away from just the downtown Q400 market, downtown Toronto, that is, and moving now into the Embraer 195 E2 and positioning those aircraft in our large hubs, Toronto, namely.
Yeah, Toronto, Ottawa.
So
Yep. Yep.
yeah, exactly. And I was commenting, like, this is a dynamic that Air Canada hadn't seen for the last 20 to 25 years, when we had airlines like Canada 3000 and Royal, around the time of 9/11, just before. So this is a domestic situation that we haven't seen in a long time. And in particular, if you look at the fleet ambitions for Flair and Lynx and Porter, it's almost like north of 150 new airplanes coming to Canada for
That's a
domestic
lot of
competition.
planes for a country that, I mean, really,
Yeah,
Canada's what, 25 million people at this point? It's a lot of
it's
new planes.
you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised that we just crossed 40 million.
Ah, well,
So
I'm
yeah,
sorry for slighting Canada of about 15 million people. My bad. But I mean,
but we,
still, the 150 new planes on top of Air Canada and WestJet in the market is a lot of growth.
yeah, there's questions about the sustainability of that, and speculation about who will survive or not survive. But a couple of things that I just want to add. Firstly, if you look at the Canadian population, how we're split over the country, if you draw this like corridor between Quebec City and Windsor, literally, you know, almost 60% of the population in Canada lives in that very narrow band.
Yes.
And then when you go west of Toronto and east of Calgary, very small populations, but a big, geographic landmass to cover. And then there's a bit of a triangle between Edmonton, Calgary, and Vancouver. So the Canadian population, even though we're 40 million, we're very sparsely distributed over the country. And wherever there are population centers, it's heavily concentrated. And that's why, there's many reasons why the ULCC model hasn't worked in Canada. It's because the population centers are, so tightly condensed into small bands, and there's a
Right.
lot of geography to cover. Then on top of that,
Right.
Canada is a high cost jurisdiction, high tax jurisdiction, which is a natural disincentive for carriers that are trying to stimulate traffic through pricing.
No,
So that's
absolutely.
why
And
we're
yeah.
yeah
No, everything you say, it's interesting because I look at Canada and it's, you've got your hubs, but essentially you and WestJet and before WestJet Canadian, I mean, you're essentially flying the same routes from the same cities because that's where the people live. And it's hard. It's not like here in the U.S. where, Delta's got their Detroit hub and United's in Chicago and American's in Dallas. Like everywhere's a big city. In Canada, it's everyone's got to be in Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal. It's yeah,
yeah. I think there's 5 or 6 metro areas in Canada that have 1 million people and up. So again, it's a lot of this demand is concentrated primarily in 3 cities: Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. That's incidentally where our hubs are. So definitely very interesting.
yes, oh yes. So yeah, so you've got these new competitors coming in. Actually, you're going to be losing one, maybe Swoop merging back into WestJet. Just announced on Friday. But I mean, is that pressuring you? Is that changing your domestic network strategy at all, or is it you're confident in what you're doing and continue to stay the course?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. Seeing this kind of competitive swell coming our way, we made a decision that for us, success is defending our leadership in Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. So prior to the pandemic, we had a very, semi, large operation in secondary cities like Edmonton, Winnipeg, Ottawa, and we really scaled that back down to services that only fly to hubs.
Okay.
And we said to ourselves, we've got to double down on Pearson, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. And, if we can maintain that, that's the definition of success, and build, large connecting hubs in each of those destinations, within the country, but also internationally to kind of maintain our competitive position. Because we're saying the strength of our model obviously is in the size and presence that we have in each of these cities, but also the connection opportunities that we've got through those hubs, which obviously our competitors can't match. So from
Absolutely.
that
And one,
perspective, yeah,
I just want to say one thing we haven't highlighted is your sixth freedom strategy, where Toronto, especially Toronto, but also Montreal and Vancouver, function as essentially third party hubs to the US. And you feed a lot of traffic from the Northeast over Toronto to Europe, from the West Coast through Vancouver to Asia. I mean, it's not just the domestic Canadian market that's feeding those hubs. And you've done an exceptionally good job at that over the past decade, 2 decades. So yeah, just wanted to shout that out, shout out, shout out for that.
thanks. No, thanks for noticing. Yeah, and we're very bullish about our Sixth Freedom, opportunity going forward. I think if you were to look at the map or the globe, and you kind of see that our natural advantage is really geography, right? Like from Vancouver, we are the shortest flight path from anywhere in the North Pacific to Southeast Asia. Vancouver is the shortest flight path. Even when you take Russia overflight consideration into the mix, then you look at Toronto. It's a really good east west hub. It's in the middle of, I think Toronto's now what, the fourth largest metro area in North America, just behind Chicago, Dallas. I think it's actually Dallas, New York, and LA. Toronto's number 4.
Wow, I didn't
And
realize
and
Toronto had grown that much, but that's amazing.
Yeah, and then you've got Montreal, which one has complementary demographics to Toronto, in the sense that Montreal is a francophone city, and there's going to be a lot of immigration from francophone countries from all over the world. So that gives you almost like complementary between what happens in Toronto's market dynamics and Montreal's market dynamics. But Montreal is also the shortest transatlantic waypoint. Um, so you bring that all together, and you realize you've got a pretty big geographical advantage, and if you can leverage that properly, that represents a big opportunity, and we've noticed that with the Sixth Freedom. That being said, we're still in the early innings of that strategy. What we did in the pandemic is, knowing that the U.S. market was going to rebound quicker than the Canadian market, we basically rebanked our entire hubs to maximize on that opportunity. And our hubs are slightly peakier than they were pre-COVID because of that opportunity. But that being said, our latest market share number still has us at 2%. We're
Okay.
still not even a top 20 U.S. international player. So every incremental market share point that we gain is a big opportunity for us.
Nice. Well, that leads me to the interesting question you've got. You have a transborder joint venture with United, and that's that market, and then you partner with United on the transatlantic separately. Do you work with United on those Sixth Freedom flows, or do you guys compete in that market? How does that work?
Well, we do partner because on the North Atlantic, Lufthansa, United, Air Canada have antitrust, and we sit down together almost quarterly to design our networks across the
Okay.
Atlantic. So United's fully aware of what we're up to. We're fully aware of what United's up to, and the same with Lufthansa. Again, I don't see us competing with United in the sense that we're such a small player compared to United on the transatlantic out of the US.
Okay.
That our market share is kind of inconsequential to United's business. So I think we've got a nice thing going in terms of our relationship with United and how we complement each other.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, I wanted to ask on the transborder, has the JV changed sort of what you're doing there? Because now you guys sort of tried multiple times in the past, and you finally got the joint JV through last year. Is that has that adjusted your network strategy on the transborder, or are things sort of same as before?
Well, it certainly has, because with the JV, there's been all kinds of customer benefits and revenue management benefits that are unlocking the potential of using each other's hubs. We've had antitrust with United since the mid '90s, but it's only recently that we've locked ourselves into a revenue share JV. But even though we had antitrust, and even though we were very strong commercial partners, we didn't necessarily, align our networks and our schedules optimally. And now with this JV, if you look like a Toronto, Chicago, for example, or Toronto to Newark, we almost have an hourly shuttle schedule where we complement each other.
Nice. And
And
I'm sitting here in
and
DC, and the big expansion I love this summer is you've got Calgary and Vancouver coming online. One route's on United metal, one route's on Air Canada metal, and that's it's always nice to see some more love for my hometown. But yeah.
yeah, no, we're super excited, and Vancouver Dulles is killing it. We're so happy with
Excellent.
those results. So definitely a good ad, and again, wouldn't be possible without United's contribution for sure.
All right. Well, Mark, this has been a fascinating discussion. Really, really enjoy having you on. It sounds like things are going well there. Lots of work still to do, but this is the airline industry. There always is. So we're so happy to have you on the Airline Weekly Lounge this week.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Great discussion, and feel free to reach out anytime, Ed.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Airline Weekly Lounge podcast. Check out airlineweekly.com for a new issue every Monday and updates on the latest airline news throughout the week.